Now the Deathwatch have combat doctrines and new stratagems, I thought it would be a good time to look at the core of the Codex, the Deathwatch Veteran Kill Team. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the Deathwatch Kill Team with its enormous datasheet that's one of the most flexible in 40k, talking about how we can get even more out of them on the battlefield with the addition of any other special rules, and how I would run them in games of 40k. In 8th, they've been a really interesting unit to me, and with their new combat doctrines, they're more dangerous than they ever were, and I'm honestly really excited to try some out on the board. We'll hopefully be doing a few more videos on Deathwatch over the coming week, including the Primaris Kill Team, some of their characters, and a look at their army tactics, traits and relics. So if you'd like to see any of that stuff, then feel free to subscribe. In the background, the Deathwatch are the Inquisition's militant branch for hunting xenos. They were founded during the War of the Beast against the alien orcs, and they're drawn from Space Marines from multiple different chapters who have blacked out armour but retain one shoulder pad on their right hand side, denoting the chapter that they came from. Their left shoulder pad bears Silver Litany Xenomortis on, and they're some of the very much special forces among the Space Marine world. Deathwatch kill teams are often drawn together for specific missions to counter a certain perfidious xenos threat, and they're equipped with rare and experimental weapons that even standard Space Marines don't have access to. Deathwatch kill teams are typically led by Inquisitors, but Deathwatch captains or librarians may take command of individual units, or they may be led by a Watchmaster. In battle, the individual kill teams take up gear depending on the foe that they're fighting, though they commonly employ bolters equipping special issue ammunition, dissolving certain biological xenos with hellfire shells, while punching through the hard armour of others with Kraken or Vengeance rounds. It's not uncommon to see them wielding fancy power weapons and xenophase blades, or the fearsome Deathwatch Frag Cannon that can shred through infantry and armour alike with fearsome bursts of shrapnel. So let's see what these hyper-elite and flexible forces can do for us on the tabletop. Now the Deathwatch Veteran Kill Team has one of the biggest datasheets in all of Warhammer 40k. It's so big in fact that I felt the need to split it down into 3 different images. It is of course a troops choice for Codex Deathwatch, and at base it consists of 5 veterans, of which one of them can be a Watch Sergeant and one can be a Black Shield, although the Black Shield will cost you 2 additional points. At base these veterans are equipped with a bolt gun and frag and crack grenades, and they'll typically be 15 points a model because in Deathwatch Codex the bolt gun costs 1 point. It's well worth it though with the various types of special issue ammunition that you can fire. The Deathwatch have a basic tactical marine profile, except they have 2 attacks. The Watch Sergeant has an additional 1, so he has 3 attacks, as does the Black Shield, and the Watch Sergeant also has Leadership 9. And the advantage of the Black Shield is that he gives you a heroic intervention, as well as that additional attack. From there, the rest of the squad is really quite flexible. You can keep it with just 5 models, or fill out the kill team with up to 10 models, with either more veterans, or Terminators, Bikers, or Vanguard veterans as part of a mixed unit. The Terminators will cost you 34 points when equipped with a Power Fist, though you can trade this out for a Power Sword to make them 29 points per model. They're a real asset to include in the squad, as they allow them to have a 2+ save for tanking light anti-infantry firepower, and each Terminator also has 2 wounds, meaning that they're even more resistant to this sort of weapons. In addition, if you include at least 1 Terminator, then the unit will be automatically passing morale tests, due to the unflinching rule that we'll see in a second. The Biker will cost you 23 points as he's equipped with a twin bolt gun. Again, he's a bit better at tanking anti-infantry firepower as he has 2 wounds instead of 1, and he can be quite useful for getting the squad to have shorter charge distances because he's got a lot longer movement and he's got quite a long base, so it means he can add quite a lot of threat range to the squad if they're trying to get into close combat. In addition, his special rule, which is Relentless Assault, will allow the entire units to both fall back and charge later that turn, making them really quite flexible and a bit of a nightmare to deal with on the tabletop as you can't just lock them up by throwing a squad into them. Finally, the Vanguard veteran is equipped with a jump pack, so has a movement of 12 inches and 2 attacks, and their special rule is one of the most interesting actually. Their Vanguard Strike special rule can allow the squad to fall back from a close combat and still shoot in the following shooting phase, meaning that you can potentially unload a whole load of close range special issue ammunition into them. So if you do include a Biker and a Vanguard veteran, you can essentially engage in close combat and then fall back and still fight to full effect. Before we get into their war gear options, let's take a look at their special rules, starting with their special issue ammunition. Now this special issue ammunition is really quite interesting and is one of the main draws to using Deathwatch in my mind. Each time that a unit is chosen to shoot and includes certain bolt weapons in the list, which includes everything from combi bolters, Stalker bolt rifles, regular bolt rifles, bolt pistols, storm bolters and regular bolt guns, pretty much any of the rapid fire and pistol variants, but not things like heavy bolters. Then you get to choose one of these weapon options, and these are Dragonfire, Hellfire, Kraken or Vengeance, and you've got to choose one of them for the entire squad, and they all have to use that one. They all have slightly different benefits. Dragonfire is probably the worst, whereas just add one to the hit rolls to this weapon when targeting a unit that's in cover. It's not bad, but some of the extra AP of the other rounds are likely going to be better. Hellfire rounds are perhaps the most universal, always wounding on a 2+ against anything that isn't a vehicle or Titanic model, meaning that you're always going to be guaranteed to stack some saves on the enemy unit, so they're likely to fail some with enough weight of dice. And it's particularly good for downing things like high toughness monsters, which you'd typically be struggling to wound with standard bolt weapons. I'd say this one's typically the regular go-to, but Kraken and Vengeance can be useful against armoured targets. Kraken adds 1 to the AP of the attack, so your standard bolt gun will become AP-1 for example. It adds 3 inches to the range of pistols and 6 inches to the range of regular other weapons. This means it can be a good one for engaging enemies at really long ranges, and sometimes it can help more of your squad be in rapid fire, say if you're just outside 12 inches but within 15 inches of the opponent. In these circumstances it can be the way to go, or when you just need a bit more AP for say 2+ save targets or something. The other option is the Vengeance round, which actually takes range away from you. It's 6 inches shorter than a standard bolt gun, or 3 inches shorter for a standard pistol. But for this one you get the reward of having AP-2 on the weapon, which is really quite nice indeed. I would bear in mind though that this range reduction can be sometimes problematic. Say if they're deep striking in, they won't be able to rapid fire with this if they're greater than 9 inches away and using standard bolt guns. Generally speaking though, it's Kraken or Vengeance for armoured targets, or vehicles or Titanics, and Hellfire rounds for near enough everything else. The Dragonfires just don't really have much of a niche at the moment. We'll come back to these later when we assess the different bolt gun options that they have. In terms of their other special rules, they have And They Shall Know No Fear, Bolter Discipline, which sort of functions as another type of bolt round that you can do, instead of using any of the special issue ammunition. If you remain stationary, then you can fire your rapid fire weapons twice up to 24 inches, and sometimes this can actually trump the other special issue ammunition options, by trading all the fancy stuff for just double the shots. They also have Shock Assault for the extra attack on the charge, and of course the new Combat Doctrines to give them an additional AP-1 if you're either in the Devastator Tactical or Assault Doctrine for the weapons that it affects. Other than these fairly standard ones, they have the Mixed Unit Special Rule, which is there to show that they can have different toughness characteristics, say if you take a bunch of bikes. The rule is that you have to use the toughness characteristic of the majority of models when the enemy makes the wound rolls against it. If there's no majority, then the Deathwatch player chooses, so say if you took 5 veterans and 5 bikers, then the whole unit will be toughness 5 as a result. I believe in an FAQ this was also updated so that Terminators and Bikers have their respective keywords for the purposes of Bolter Discipline, meaning that if you choose to use that ammo option, then they'll be able to access it all the time. They'll both be firing on rapid fire up to 24 inches with their Storm Bolter and Twin Bolt Gun. Helpfully though, it is stated that they move through battlefield terrain as if they were an infantry unit, even if they do contain any biker models. This makes Deathwatch bikers quite interesting, as they're the only bikes that don't fly in 40k that can go into top floor ruins and things. Presumably they're very good at doing tricks and wheelies and stuff. It's also pretty helpful for getting them a cover save, meaning that the biker doesn't have to be entirely in cover. It just has to be on the edge of a ruined base, much like any other infantry squad would. We already briefly went through the different special rules that the Terminator, Biker and Vanguard veteran can give. I think it's quite nice that they incentivise giving the Deathwatch more reason to take these different specialists, rather than just have an entire kill team of veterans. The rest of their special rules pretty much pertain to their combat gear, so let's get on to that now. First of all, the veterans, Watch Sergeant and Black Shield are all incredibly flexible. They can all replace their bolt gun with 2 items from the Deathwatch equipment list, and this is pretty extensive indeed. First up, this list allows you 1 ranged weapon, so that bolt gun can be swapped for a combi weapon of any sort, a Deathwatch shotgun, a flamer, grav gun, melt gun, plasma gun, Stalker pattern bolt gun, or a storm bolter, so just ludicrously flexible in the amount of options that you have. As one of the squad's main selling points is this awesome special issue ammunition, I wouldn't usually bother with any of the special weapons. The combi weapons are interesting as they can give you those extra melter or plasma shots in addition to the special issue ammunition, at the cost of both of them hitting a bit worse, and they do cost a fair bit more than the standard bolt gun, which is already pretty damaging. I'd say that from this list the storm bolters are the single most interesting pick. They only cost 1 additional point compared with the bolter, so your standard veteran is 16 points, and they just get double the amount of shots. 4 shots within 12-inch range, and 2 shots at 24-inch range, and they're all special issue ammunition shots, so it's just a horrendous damage output. In competitive terms, I would say that the Storm Bolter is your default pick for a veteran kill team armament, and one that you should weigh up everything else against. The Deathwatch shotgun is an interesting option, and again has a sort of special issue ammunition of its own. It costs the same amount as a bolt gun, just 1 point in addition to the regular veteran's stat line, and you can choose to fire the Crypt Clearer, Xeno Purge or Worm's Breach shells. Crypt Clearer is the pretty much standard issue shotgun round. It's strength 4, AP nothing, damage 1, assault 2 and 16-inch range, and its special ability is to reroll failed wound rolls. The Xeno Purge rounds are also 16 inches and assault 2, they're strength 4, AP -1, again damage 1, but if you happen to be within half range, so 8 inches, then the damage characteristic becomes 2. This would be a lot more interesting if you could manage to get it in range when you come out of Deep Strike, but unfortunately you can't, as half range is less than 8 inches and Deep Strike happens 9 inches or more away. It's certainly powerful if you can get it in range, and will certainly be solid against 2-wound infantry such as other Primaris Marines, but it still doesn't compare well against the Storm Bolter, which makes up for the lack of damage too, with getting just double the amount of shots, so it's pretty much superior in most circumstances. Finally, the Worm's Breath shell has a 7-inch range, so again can't be shot out of Deep Strike, and it's essentially an assault D6 flamer, but with a strength of 3 instead of strength of 4 that auto hits its targets. Auto hitting is certainly nice, it's not bad against hordes, but I feel that the other two are the ones that you're likely going to be going for more, particularly because they have the longer range. Unfortunately, I do think that the Deathwatch shotgun, at least from a competitive sense, is pretty much fully eclipsed by the Storm Bolter at the moment. They are really fun, fluffy upgrades, and they can certainly work fine, but I just don't think that they're 100% optimal. If we move on, then the Stalker Baton Bolt Gun is another really interesting option. This one costs you exactly the same as the standard bolt gun at your standard 1 point, so again the Deathwatch veterans will be 15 points each. This one I think has a bit more of a niche. It's got a 30-inch range and is heavy too, strength 4, AP -1 and damage 1. This one's best for any kill teams that are thinking about sitting at the back holding objectives, where their longer range that can be further extended with Kraken rounds can come into effect, and getting an additional AP -1 on top of the special issue ammunition is really good. For a Deathwatch kill team that's starting on the board and is planning on staying put and not moving, then these are possibly the optimal pick. They're cheaper and they do better at the Storm Bolter, provided that you're not within 12-inch range. If you're going for a full Deathwatch army, then you are likely going to need some objective holding kill teams, and these guys can certainly compete very solidly with the Primaris versions for that role. If you are thinking about moving the squad around though, then Storm Bolters are likely going to be better, as they won't suffer the penalty to move and shoot when firing that heavy weapons do. So that's the ranged weapons that the veterans can be equipped with. They can also be equipped with close combat weapons. The close combat section includes bolt pistols and chainswords, but also interestingly storm shields. And for 2 points a model to give them a 3+ invul save, again these are pretty much an auto include on veterans wherever you can take them. Your standard tactical Space Marine defensive profile just really isn't all that strong against the horrors of the 41st millennium these days, so to have them safe behind a 3+ invul save while they blaze away with their Storm Bolters or other special issue ammunition weapons is really powerful indeed, and it will mean that your opponent will struggle to chew through them anywhere near as easily. They'll just have to rely on mass firepower than any high strength, high AP weapons. For veterans, I would usually say that this means that your standard veteran should be armed with a Storm Shield and Storm Bolter, if you're trying to absolutely optimise the unit for jumping in and killing enemy at close, rather than backing off and maybe considering the Stalker Bolter. Storm Shields are only 2 points, so this veteran will be 18 points. Other than this, they can take all sorts of other fancy power weapons, everything from power axes, fists, maws and swords, to the mighty Thunderhammer, all of which we know what they do, and it's honestly not a bad idea to add a little bit of close combat muscle to your kill team, as they're likely to be dropping in close to the enemy and might well be being charged in short order. Giving a power fist or Thunderhammer to the Watch Sergeant or Black Shield is additionally rewarding because they get 3 attacks at base and 4 with Shock Assault, so you'll be swinging a good number of times with these powerful weapons. Generally speaking, I wouldn't go nuts with them and just include a power fist or 2 or Thunderhammer or 2, but if you wanted to, you could absolutely build an entirely close combat kill team and not bother with the special issue ammunition at all. Another unique option they have is to use the Xenophase Blade. This one's a Deathwatch unique power sword that will cost you 5 points rather than the standard 4. It basically has the same profile as a power sword, except your opponent must reroll successful invul saves for wounds caused by this weapon. It's certainly interesting, and as a power weapon goes it's pretty cheap, and for the points it's really not too bad an upgrade on your standard Deathwatch veterans. I do tend to go for the Power Fist or Thunderhammer in general though, because I think that what they need most is extra help against tanks and things, which Deathwatch really struggle against as an army as a whole. Finally, you can also equip the Deathwatch veterans with any of the special pistols, so hand flamers, plasma pistols, inferno pistols, but seeing as you can take storm bolters and things instead, I would just do this, they're just nowhere near as good. Moving on, you can next replace up to 4 veterans with their bolt guns for weapons from the heavy weapons list, and if they do this they can't replace any other weapons with weapons from the Deathwatch veterans upgrade list, so you are foregoing a storm shield to take these, which is a bit of a shame. The heavy weapons are the Frag Cannon, Heavy Bolter, Heavy Flamer, Infernus Heavy Bolter, and Missile Launcher. Missile launchers can sort of turn the kill team into a sort of pseudo Devastator squad. They could basically be a standard Devastator squad, maybe with a couple of storm shields to tank additional damage, and just blaze away from the back all game long. Deathwatch's anti-tank options are a bit limited, so it really wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to do this. I find that the heavy flamers are a bit short range, they're only really good against infantry, so just rely on your special issue ammunition for this, and I wouldn't bother with that. And same for the heavy bolter, the special issue ammunition just does what it does better. To be honest, if you're taking either of these, I'd certainly upgrade to an Infernus heavy bolter instead. It's exactly the same price as the heavy flamer, and it also incorporates the heavy bolter profile, and you can even fire them both at once with a -1 to hit profile on the heavy bolter. For me, the main issue with this is actually getting the heavy flamer in range again. It's not great for out of deep strike as you'll be out of range with the flamer profile. Perhaps you could consider it if you're getting them out of a transport or something like that. Out of the heavy weapons list, I'd say that the best is the Frag Cannon, which is good because it's both an iconic and incredibly cool weapon that the Deathwatch have access to. This one will cost you 20 points over your standard veteran, so a standard veteran with a Frag Cannon is 34 points. It's got 2 different options, a frag round and a shell. The frag round is a assault 2d6 heavy flamer essentially that automatically hits its target and has an 8-inch range. Again, sadly out of deep strike range once you drop down, but absolutely brutal if you have a couple of these pile out of a transport or something. 2d6 strength 6 auto hits with AP -1 are going to give absolutely everything a pause. If you can get this profile within range of the target, then literally if you roll well, one frag cannon could be deleting an entire squad if it gets lucky. It's helpful that it also has the shell round for a turn when it drops down if you are thinking about deep striking them, as it at least lets it do something. The shell round has a 24-inch range, it's assault 2, strength 7, AP -2 and damage 2. Furthermore, if you can get up close and personal to the opponent, which is likely if you're dropping down, then instead it gets strength 9 and AP -3 when it's within 12-inch range. This does mean that a frag cannon in shell mode is actually more effective than a las cannon if you're firing it up in the close range option. Again, another way to add a little bit of anti-tank punch to your Deathwatch army, though you aren't going to be one-rounding tanks with one of these, you'd need to take several. I do overall like frag cannons, but they are pretty pricey at 20 points, and particularly so for something that you're putting on the front line. I'd be most a fan of these if you have a big squad full of storm shields or terminators and things to try and keep them safe, so hopefully they can have a good few rounds of firing before they get gunned down. They're basically investing more points in your kill team to make them more threatening on the tabletop. A Deathwatch kill team's already scary, but a frag cannon armed kill team is something that you really can't ignore. And finally, for the Deathwatch veterans themselves, you can also equip them with a heavy Thunderhammer. This one's a two-handed weapon, so you can't combine it with a Storm Shield again, and it's a reasonably decent upgrade on the standard Thunderhammer for if you're hitting hard targets. Like the Thunderhammer, it's strength ×2, AP -3, but instead it's damage d6, and if you make any wound rolls of 6+ with this weapon, the hits resolve with a flat damage of 6. Overall, it is less reliable than the standard Thunderhammer whenever you're fighting against things that are 2 or 3 wounds, like Primaris Marines, but it is decently better against vehicles and hard targets. Against a standard Toughness 7 vehicle, this will do an average of 4.1 damage, where the standard Thunderhammer would have done 3 for each successful hit, so for only 2 points above the normal Thunderhammer at 18 points, this can actually be worth it. One of the downsides of the heavy Thunderhammer though is that you can't take it on the Black Shield or the Watch Sergeant, so you're only going to be getting the standard 3 attacks with it with Shock Assault, rather than 4 that the Thunderhammer would have, which kind of negates any advantage it would have had. So for adding Thunderhammer Punch to a Deathwatch kill team, I'd typically take Thunderhammers on the Black Shield or Watch Sergeant first, and then add this in if I wanted more. Finally, moving on from the standard Veterans War Gear options, the Watch Sergeant can take a Combat Shield for a 5+ invul save for just 1 point. It can actually be a reasonable option if you're giving him a Thunderhammer and he also wants to have a Storm Bolter. That means he wouldn't be able to get a Storm Shield, so paying a point for a 5+ invul save is pretty reasonable. It's still a bit of a trade-off against the Storm Shield though. The Vanguard Veterans can also take a Heavy Thunderhammer or 2 items from the Vanguard list. The Vanguard list does include the Storm Shield, and it also is basically all of the power weapons and special pistols. Again, the Vanguard Veterans only have 2 attacks compared with the Watch Sergeant or Black Shield's 3, so still aren't the ideal place to take these fancy kits, but as always a Storm Shield is very welcome. A Plasma Pistol might not be the worst idea as well, just so we can contribute towards the unit's close range firepower. Next, up to 3 Terminators can replace their Storm Bolter with a weapon from the Terminator Heavy Weapon list, the Assault Cannon, Cyclone Missile Launcher or Heavy Flamer. The Assault Cannon I feel just doesn't do very well for its points versus special issue ammunition. We've already mentioned Heavy Flamers, but the Cyclone Missile Launcher again is very interesting. 2 missile launcher shots for 36 points, plus you don't even have to give up the Storm Bolter with its special issue ammunition. Definitely another decent way of adding anti-tank firepower to the squad, though it is a bit at odds with wanting to use the Terminator to tank light small arms fire, meaning that you might be wanting to get them killed first. Nevertheless, this is quite a solid option. You could even go a bit mad and include 3 with Cyclone Missile Launchers to make a very punchy kill team at long range, and use the rest of the veterans to tank wounds for them with Storm Shields. They can also replace their Power Fists with any of the weapons from the Terminator melee weapons, which are a Chain Fist, Power Axe, Power Maul, Power Sword, or Power Fist with built-in Melter Gun. Of these, my favourite is actually probably the Power Sword, unless you're looking to add some more Power Fist to the unit. By having the Terminators be extra cheap, then you don't mind tanking wounds with them quite as much, making the kill team tougher as a whole. It's really powerful to be able to take the wounds either on a 2+ armor save of a Terminator, or the 3+ invul save of a veteran, and you can pick and choose each time the unit is shot. This makes them incredibly frustrating for the opponent to try and remove, as their high AP weapons will be tanked on 3+ invul saves, and their low AP weapons will be hit by a 2+ armor save. Having a mix of Terminators and Storm Shields in the unit, I think is the way to go. The Thunderhammers can also take 2 Lightning Claws or a Thunderhammer and Storm Shield if desired, though I think that this is a less good choice than normal, as their Storm Bolters have special issue ammunition in them, which is great. The Bikers can also take a Chainsword, Power Axe, Power Maul or Power Sword. I typically take the Chainsword out of these for an extra attack in close combat for free, and the Biker can take a Deathwatch Teleport Homer, which he should, as again it's free. You place it anywhere in your deployment zone when you deploy, and this can allow your Deathwatch squad to jump back to it at any point in the movement phase if they'd rather do that compared with moving normally. I typically set up the Teleport Homer somewhere that's fairly central-ish, somewhere that it might be a good place for your Deathwatch team to jump back to unleash some special issue rounds on an advancing enemy. It's actually a really solid option for using the Biker, as the kill teams are just a little bit slow once they're on the board, having a 6-inch movement for the most part, so having a teleport move that they have the option to make, even if it is to a predetermined location, is actually pretty powerful. So that's an overview of the very comprehensive Deathwatch kill team datasheet. Overall, they can be equipped in a massive variety of different ways, and really tooled up for the task in hand, which fits the fluff very nicely. I think that the more standard build would be to have a decent squad of veterans with Storm Bolters and Storm Shields, backed up by a few Terminators and a Bike and a Vanguard veteran, and maybe throw in a Thunderhammer on one model on top of all that. Though I do think you can create some interesting and certainly viable options by using missile launchers, Cyclone Missile Launcher Terminators, or Stalker Bolter armed veterans for camping objectives at the back. So let's talk about a few other ways that we can get more out of our kill teams on the tabletop, and of course they have a ton of synergy with the Deathwatch Codex being a core troops choice. First of all, we already mentioned it briefly, but combat doctrines when they're in the tactical doctrine are just epic with special issue ammunition. Hellfire rounds from Storm Bolters that are AP-1 will chew through pretty much any non-vehicle target in the entire game, and Kraken or Vengeance rounds with additional AP can certainly be viable on plenty of other targets, particularly ones with very high armor saves. Dropping down out of Deep Strike from the Teleportarium has certainly been much more solid for them now that they can get Tactical Doctrine turn 2. On top of this, of course, they can be further augmented by their mission tactics to allow them to reroll wound rolls of 1 against the most common targets in the enemy army. Obviously it depends exactly what your opponent is playing, but choosing the troops one is certainly going to be a solid option, as there's usually a fair amount of them on the board, and Deathwatch kill teams absolutely excel at removing infantry. Basically this would allow them to get some free rerolls at least some of the time. In terms of character support, the Deathwatch are a little bit limited. but Watchmasters and Watch Captains are excellent providing rerolls, and I'm honestly a massive fan of the Watchmaster, giving you reroll of all missed hits for 115 points, and he can also be affecting multiple units per turn with this, and unlike Codex Space Marines you don't have to pay 2 CP to upgrade him. I'd be strongly considering one of him to buff the Deathwatch army in some way. Watch Captains can also be a bit more flexible, as they can have jump packs to allow them to deep strike alongside your formations, or jump in to meet a kill team coming down after the teleporter. Chaplains with a new litanies from the Psychic Awakening update can allow them to either hit better in close combat, or get +1 to hit and wound with all those nasty guns, which is only a good thing in my mind. And if you want to be trying to make Deathwatch kill teams hit combat a little bit more reliably out of deep strike, then they also have the option of the +2 to charge litany, making a 7-inch charge far more reliable than a 9-inch one. Deathwatch Librarians could also potentially help with charges as well via Veil of Time to give them a reroll. Some of the Warlord traits and relics can help out as well, but Watch Eternal can help keep a few more Deathwatch models in the game when they're near your Warlord by getting a 6 to not lose their last wound, or perhaps giving them all ignores cover with nowhere to hide, picking an enemy unit for Deathwatch to ignore cover against. The Tome of Ectoclades can also put them in the most useful mission tactic each turn. Dominus Aegis could be used to give nearby Deathwatch kill teams a 5+ invul save, provided the bearer doesn't move in the previous phase. But I honestly think that the best relic out of the bunch is the Beacon Angelus, which is the one that allows a Deathwatch infantry or biker unit to teleport to the position of the captain and set up within 6 inches of the bearer and 9 inches from an enemy model. You can use these to scoot an entire kill team across the board right in turn 1, and get a bunch of special issue ammunition fire right out of the bat, rather than having to wait till turn 2 to drop down. For me, this one's probably the best relic in the Deathwatch book. If not teleporting them or starting on the board, you can also give them a ride. The Corvus Blackstar can be a way to get them to the front quite quickly, though you're most certainly paying a premium for this delivery option. You can also use things like Rhinos or Razorbacks to truck them up the board, or interestingly with the new changes to drop pods, a drop pod could actually get them to be jumping in and using all that special issue ammunition turn 1, creating problems for the opponent straight away. They are pricey compared with putting them in the Teleportarium, which you just have to pay command points for, but this does give you the option of a turn 1 Alpha Strike, which is really quite a nice asset, and I guess it does save on CP somewhat. Naturally the build of your kill team is going to be a bit restricted in drop pods though, as you're not going to be taking the Terminator's bikes or Vanguard vets. The Corvus can transport all of these, but some of them take up the space of more models. If we move on to stratagems now, the Deathwatch infantry have a decent amount of them. Auspex scan is excellent on veterans, due to them having high firepower at close range, and is usually going to be worth 2 command points if your enemy brings in reserves near you. The Teleportarium, as we've been mentioning for most of the video, can allow you to put Deathwatch infantry in deep strike reserve, dropping down on turn 2 or turn 3 to fry the enemy with special issue bolt guns in the tactical doctrine. I'd consider this my default way to run veterans in a big kill team, as it for guaranteed gets them within range of at least some targets. If they do get into combat, you can make them fight twice with Honour Your Brothers, and get an extra few hits on any Xenos targets with Death to the Xenos. Tempest Shells is a 1 command point trade to use a bolt gun for doing D3 wounds to a vehicle, which could be helpful if you do need to shave off the last few wounds with something. You can use Optimized Salvo for 1 command point, which can allow all of your different Deathwatch veterans to fire different types of special issue ammunition, if you should so choose, which means that you could have a bit more flexibility, particularly if you're wanting to target different units with different parts of the kill team. And then one of the most useful ones are the various different 2 command point ones that allow you to add 1 to their wound roll against different battlefield roles, such as Dominator's Doctrine, which means that if you attack an enemy elite's choice with the unit, then you get +1 to the wound roll. These ones are really good at helping you deal with vehicles and hard targets with high armour, as it means that your Kraken and Vengeance rounds can actually have a decent chance of making wounds on them, and even more so if you have the appropriate mission tactic active. There's also all of the special ones for fighting different types of Xenos, which we might go into another time. From the new Psychic Awakening book, I think the most useful stratagem that they've gained is Transhuman Physiology. This is the 2 command point one that makes them not be wounded on anything better than a 4+, so it can help shield your kill team against heavy weapons, and seeing as that the enemy is usually going to be going hell for leather to delete your most threatening kill teams, then it can be a decent increase in survivability and well worth a couple of command points if it keeps a couple of your very threatening veterans alive on the field. So how would I actually use Deathwatch veterans in game? I already mentioned the rough build that we'd have, starting with a core of veterans with a Storm Shield and Stormbolter, a few Terminators, and strongly considering a Vanguard veteran or biker or both. I'd give the Terminators power swords to keep them cheap, and throw in a power fist or thunderhammer here or there for the black shield or squad sergeant. That would be my standard issue deep striking or frontline kill team with Beacon Angelus, but you really can be incredibly flexible. Maybe you could add frag cannons into that mix. Maybe you could have backfield camping ones with the Stalker baton bolters. You could go a bit mad with missiles in terms of Terminators and veterans having missile launchers and create a very threatening backfield strike force. Or you could even go for a more close combat approach and tool them up with a few more Vanguard veterans and have them try and make combat with the enemy. If I was playing with a whole bunch of Deathwatch kill teams as the core of my army, I'd be looking to deep strike at least a few of them in the teleport homer. These guys would want to be dropping down turn 2, deleting as many enemy screens as possible, and often hoping to make a charge, dealing a bit of damage with power swords or thunderhammers, and all of the attacks to the veterans of course, and maybe even try and wrap and trap an enemy unit to stop the enemy gunline from shooting them to death. You really can afford to be pretty liberal with the charges for the Deathwatch, as provided you have that Vanguard veteran, you can freely just disengage and shoot the enemy back in the next turn, and if you have a biker along as well, you can also charge too. In general, I'd prioritise their targets to be mainly enemy infantry first, then moving on to tanks and vehicles as a second priority. Their awesome special issue ammunition just isn't quite as strong against them. I'd be trying to coordinate them dropping down either into the aura of a Watchmaster or maybe deep striking alongside a Watch Captain to make maximal use of the buffs, and think about any of the relics that we discussed as well. Ideally we'd be wanting to try and end the turn in cover if we could, because it's even harder to shift Terminators that have a 2+ save when they're also in cover as well, and you could further amp up their defense with transhuman physiology. If you did have to engage hard targets, I'd have the low threshold for paying the 2 CP for wounding on +1, as against toughness 7 or 8 vehicles. When you're engaging with those high AP variant bolter rounds, then you'll be getting significantly more damage through. For squads starting on the board, I'd be aiming to start them towards the front of the deployment zone, as they're not all that mobile, and they need to be in a position where the enemy can't just back off a little bit and completely ignore them for most of the game. Obviously being in cover or out of line of sight is great if you can do it, but if you're playing with a significant amount of Deathwatch models, then it might not always be possible. Their Terminator 2+ saves and Storm Shields should keep them reasonably secure from enemy firepower, though you are certainly going to be taking casualties. For the ones on the board, you can afford to have a bit more synergy with the various characters, maybe employing some of their relics, but certainly hopefully having a Watchmaster's 4 rerolls to hit. They'd be wanting to push up into the midfield for the most part, laying down the special issue ammunition fire as they go, and hopefully contesting any objectives with OBSEC, again charging if they get opportunity to, as they're pretty decently survivable in close combat and have reasonable damage output if you've included some fists or thunderhammers. If we are playing just Deathwatch and we need some units to secure our home objectives, I typically equip them with Stalker bolters and Storm Shields, maybe throwing in a missile launcher or 2 if I was feeling generous. Overall, I think that the Deathwatch kill team is a really competitive unit, particularly now it has the new combat doctrines, and they're certainly one of the most fun and interesting datasheets to play with in all of 40k. Their main rivals within the Codex are of course the Primaris Deathwatch kill team, who have their own positives and negatives, but certainly got a decent boost with being able to access the bolt rifle intercessor stratagems from the new Psychic Awakening book. I think that they can both be strong and they both have their niche, but the standard kill team I think is more tactically flexible at the moment, and is still likely to be pretty much the default pick for Deathwatch. I'm sure we'll have time to cover the Primaris Deathwatch kill team in a later video though, so feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see that. Thanks very much for listening to an Auspex Tactics video. If you've got any further insights to building the Deathwatch kill team or how they've performed for you in game, please let me know. They're an incredibly varied unit, and it's really interesting to see what other people do with such a wide and varied datasheet. If you'd like to support the channel, then I do have a Patreon page. The link's in the description below, and it's basically what allows me to keep on making these videos quite so regularly, so if you are enjoying regularly, then any support is greatly appreciated. Of course, a massive thank you to my Patreons for helping make this channel possible. In any case, a big thank you for listening. I'll hope to see you guys next time.